Hi, everyone. Welcome to the English Story Podcast. I'm Emily, and today we have something a bit different for you. We're going to explore how subordinating conjunctions work in English, and we have a fantastic story that will help illustrate their use in real-life contexts.
Hello, everyone. I'm John, and I'm excited to share a personal story with you today. Subordinating conjunctions are crucial for connecting ideas in complex sentences, and they help us express relationships like cause and effect, contrast, and time. By the end of this episode, you'll have a much clearer understanding of how to use subordinating conjunctions effectively.
That's right, John. Subordinating conjunctions might sound a bit technical, but they're actually just the words we use to join two ideas together, especially when one idea depends on or is connected to the other. Today, John will take us on an adventure into the mountains. And as we go through his story, we'll see how these conjunctions are used to create more interesting and detailed sentences.
I've had some pretty exciting experiences in the mountains, and I'm looking forward to sharing one of them with you today. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Here's the story of my mountain adventure. It was a challenging yet rewarding experience that I'll never forget. As I tell the story, pay attention to the words I use to connect different parts of the narrative. These are the subordinating conjunctions we'll be focusing on later. Last summer, I decided to go on a solo hiking trip in the Rocky Mountains. I had always wanted to challenge myself with a difficult hike, so I chose a trail that was known for its stunning views as well as its tough terrain. Before I left, I made sure to pack all the essentials because I knew that the weather in the mountains could change rapidly. The first day of the hike was perfect. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and I felt full of energy. As I climbed higher, the views became more and more breathtaking. However, by the afternoon, dark clouds began to gather, and I knew that a storm was coming. I had to decide whether I should continue hiking to the next campsite or find a place to set up my tent before the storm hit. Since the trail ahead looked challenging and I didn't want to get caught in the storm, I chose to set up camp early. Just as I finished setting up my tent, the rain started pouring down. I was glad I had made the decision to stop because the storm was intense, with strong winds and heavy rain. The next morning, the storm had passed, and I felt relieved that my tent had held up well through the night. Although the ground was wet and slippery, I decided to continue my hike. I was determined to reach the summit before the end of the day, even though I knew it would be tough. As I hiked, I encountered several obstacles: fallen trees, muddy paths, and steep cliffs, but I kept going because I was determined to reach the top. Finally, after hours of hiking, I reached the summit. The view was absolutely incredible, and I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. As I stood there, looking out over the mountains, I realized that the challenges I had faced along the way had made the experience even more meaningful. I stayed at the summit for a while, taking in the beauty of the landscape and reflecting on the journey. Eventually, I knew I had to start my descent because it was getting late and I needed to reach the campsite before dark. The hike down was easier than the climb, although I had to be careful on the slippery paths. By the time I reached the campsite, I was exhausted but happy. The mountain had tested my limits, but it had also rewarded me with unforgettable memories. I knew that I would return to the mountains someday because the experience had been so enriching.
Wow, John, what an adventure! Your story really paints a vivid picture of what it's like to hike in the mountains. Before we dive into the grammar focus, let's take a moment to discuss some of the key vocabulary from your story.
Absolutely, Emily. Let's start with the word summit. The summit is the highest point of a mountain. In the story, I mentioned reaching the summit, which means I made it to the very top of the mountain.
Another important word is terrain. You described the terrain as tough. Terrain refers to the physical features of the land, especially the type of ground you're walking on. It could be rocky, steep, muddy, or smooth.
I also use the word obstacles. An obstacle is something that makes it difficult to move forward or complete a task. In the story, the obstacles I encountered included fallen trees and steep cliffs.
And let's not forget descent. After you reached the summit, you mentioned starting your descent. The word descent refers to the act of going down, especially from a higher place, like a mountain or hill.
These words are all useful when talking about outdoor activities, especially hiking. Now that we've covered the vocabulary, let's move on to the grammar focus of today's episode: subordinating conjunctions.
Subordinating conjunctions are words that connect an independent clause with a dependent clause. An independent clause is a complete sentence that can stand on its own, while a dependent clause cannot stand alone and needs the independent clause to complete its meaning.
That's right, Emily. Subordinating conjunctions help us show the relationship between the two clauses. They can indicate time, cause and effect, contrast, and more. In my story, I use several subordinating conjunctions such as because, although, since, and before. These words help me connect different parts of the story and explain how one event led to another.
Let's break down how subordinating conjunctions are formed and used. When you use a subordinating conjunction, it's usually placed at the beginning of the dependent clause. For example, in the sentence, I decided to set up camp early because the storm was coming. The word because introduces the reason why I set up camp early.
Another example from my story is, although the ground was wet and slippery, I decided to continue my hike. Here, although is used to introduce a contrasting idea. The ground was wet and slippery, but I still decided to keep going.
Subordinating conjunctions are versatile and can be used to express different types of relationships between clauses. Here are a few common subordinating conjunctions and how they're typically used. Because used to show cause and effect. I stopped hiking because it started raining. Although though used to show contrast. Although it was raining, I continued my hike. Since can be used to show time or cause. Since I started early, I had plenty of time to reach the summit. Before used to show time. I packed my bag before I left for the mountains. If used to show a condition. If the weather is good, I'll go hiking tomorrow. When used to show time. I was happy when I reached the summit.
It's important to remember that the order of the clauses can change without changing the meaning. For example, I decided to continue my hike although the ground was slippery means the same thing as, although the ground was slippery, I decided to continue my hike.
Exactly. Subordinating conjunctions are essential for creating complex sentences that are rich in detail. They help you explain the relationships between different events or ideas, making your speech and writing more interesting and informative.
Let's practice using subordinating conjunctions in different situations to see how they work in various contexts.
I'm going to give you a sentence with a blank, and your task is to fill in the blank with the correct subordinating conjunction. I'll provide a few options, and you can choose the one that best fits the sentence. Let's get started. It started raining. We decided to set up camp. Options A because, B although, C before. Correct answer A. Because. The sentence should be, because it started raining, we decided to set up camp.
I kept hiking. I was tired. Options A, if. B, although. C, when. Correct answer B, although. The sentence should be, I kept hiking although I was tired.
We reached the summit, the sun was setting. Options A before, B since, C because. Correct answer A before. The sentence should be, we reached the summit before the sun was setting.
You see dark clouds, it's best to find shelter. Options A, if. B, because. C, although. Correct answer A, if. The sentence should be, if you see dark clouds, it's best to find shelter.
I felt relieved the storm had passed. Options A although, B because, C when. Correct answer C when. The sentence should be, I felt relieved when the storm had passed.
Great job. Practicing these sentences is a great way to get comfortable using subordinating conjunctions. They're essential tools for connecting ideas and making your sentences more complex and interesting.
Subordinating conjunctions are like the threads that weave your thoughts together. They help you express cause and effect, time, contrast, and more, making your communication clearer and more effective. Today, we explored subordinating conjunctions, starting with John's mountain adventure story. We learned how these conjunctions connect an independent clause with a dependent clause, helping to create complex sentences that are rich in meaning.
We discussed common subordinating conjunctions like because, although, since, before, if, and when, and how they're used to express relationships between ideas, whether it's cause and effect, contrast, or time.
We also practiced using subordinating conjunctions in different sentences to see how they work in various contexts. Understanding and using these conjunctions correctly can really elevate your English, making your speech and writing more sophisticated and engaging.
We hope this episode has given you a better understanding of subordinating conjunctions and how to use them effectively. Remember, the more you practice, the more natural it will become to use these conjunctions in your everyday language.
Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear from you. Leave us a comment or a review, and let us know what topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes.
Keep practicing, and remember to enjoy the process of learning. The more you listen and practice, the more natural these grammar points will become.
Goodbye, and see you next time on the English Story Podcast.